Hey, what's up guys? This is the conclusion video to what if Mace Windu went to Kashyyyk instead of Yoda. This is the full video. Part 4 is included in this. Each part will be timestamped so you can jump ahead accordingly, or you can watch from beginning to end. It's up to you. But either way, I hope you enjoy. So without further ado, let's get into it. In this alternate timeline, the roles were reversed, and the fate of the galaxy was forever altered. In the original story, we all knew that in the midst of the Clone Wars, Grandmaster Yoda took it upon himself to travel to the planet of Kashyyyk to aid the Wookiees in their fight against the CIS. Meanwhile, Master Mace Windu was left on Coruscant, where he had eventually learned from Anakin Skywalker that Palpatine was the Sith Lord they had been searching for. But in this alternate timeline, it was Mace Windu who journeyed to defend the Wookiees, leaving Grandmaster Yoda on Coruscant. It was here where Yoda would learn from Anakin Skywalker the shocking news about Palpatine's true identity. The outcome of this change would alter the fate of the galaxy for generations to come. How would Yoda, known for his wisdom and powerful Force abilities, react to this information? Would he be able to defeat Palpatine and restore peace to the Republic, or would he be faced with new challenges that he couldn't overcome? The outcome of this alternate timeline would change the fate of the galaxy forever. Anakin Skywalker, breathing heavily, burst into the chambers of Grandmaster Yoda. "Master Yoda, I must speak with you," he said urgently. Yoda was in the middle of meditating, opened his eyes and looked at Anakin with a calm expression. "What is it, young Skywalker?" Yoda asked, sensing the urgency in Anakin's voice. "I have just learned a terrible truth, Master Yoda. Chancellor Palpatine is the Sith Lord we have been searching for," Anakin said, still trying to catch his breath. Yoda's eyes narrowed and he stood up. His walking stick clicked on the stone floor. "Disturbing this is," Yoda said, his voice steady. "Your bravery, unnoticed, it is not." But Yoda could sense the conflict within Anakin. He could feel the young Jedi's hesitation and unease. He would not ignore this, and instead, he asked Anakin what was bothering him. "Hesitant, you are." Anakin was silent for a moment, looking down at the ground. He then looked up to Yoda with a forced smile. "I'm fine, Master Yoda. Just a little overwhelmed by the news." Anakin lied, trying to hide his true thoughts. However, Anakin was truly worried about Palpatine having the information that could save his wife from death. The burden of his knowledge weighed heavily on him, and he felt like he was running out of time. He wondered if the dark side truly held the answers he needed. Yoda nodded, his eyes scrutinizing Anakin. "Deceit and destruction, the path of the dark side is. Solutions promised, never truly offered." Anakin nodded, his eyes downcast. "I know, Master Yoda." "Trust in the Force, you must," Yoda said, his voice firm. "The future uncertain it is. In the present we are. Allow the Force to guide you." Some time would pass. Yoda sat quietly in his chambers, deep in thought. The war was raging on and the galaxy was in turmoil, but there was something even more pressing on Yoda's mind. The Dark Lord of the Sith, Palpatine, was plotting something sinister, and Yoda had to act fast. Most of the powerful Jedi were spread thin, fighting on different fronts, leaving only a few at the Jedi Temple. Despite this, Yoda knew he couldn't wait for reinforcements. He had to confront Palpatine, and he needed someone to stand by his side. After much contemplation, he decided to put his trust in Anakin Skywalker. Anakin was a conflicted Jedi, torn between his loyalty to the Order and his love for Padme Amidala. But Yoda saw the good in Anakin. Yoda summoned Anakin to his chambers and informed him of his plan. He wanted Anakin to join him in confronting Palpatine, along with Kit Fisto and Saesee Tiin. Anakin was overjoyed at Yoda's decision to trust him. He felt like the Jedi Order had lost faith in him, and this gesture from Yoda made him feel appreciated and valued. As Anakin, Yoda, Kit Fisto, and Saesee Tiin approached the Chancellor's office, Anakin's mind was in turmoil. He remembered the moment he found out that Palpatine was the Sith Lord. The shock and betrayal he felt was still fresh in his mind. Palpatine was not only a ruthless Sith Lord, but he may also be the only person who had the knowledge to save Padme from death. The thought of losing her was unbearable, and Anakin was torn between his loyalty to the Jedi Order and his love for Padme. But as they approached the door to the Chancellor's office, Anakin's thoughts shifted back to Padme. he couldn't shake the feeling that Palpatine had held the key to saving her. He knew that the Jedi Order wouldn't approve, but he couldn't help but feel that he needed to do anything to save her. As Yoda and the others prepared to enter the room, Anakin hung back for a moment. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He felt the weight of his choices heavy on his shoulders. He knew that he had to choose, and the consequences of his decision would change his life forever. As the group entered the office, Palpatine was pleased to see Anakin among them. However, not a word was said between them, as Yoda stepped forward to arrest the Sith Lord. "Under arrest you are, Chancellor," Yoda declared, his voice firm and steady. Palpatine's face contorted into a sneer as he responded, "You fool. Do you really think you can stop me?" With a roar, Palpatine lunged towards the Jedi, unleashing a forced scream that sent shockwaves through the room. The scream impaired Saesee Tiin, causing Palpatine to strike him down instantly. With one less opponent to worry about, Palpatine set his focus on Kit Fisto, but Yoda could see Palpatine's plans. He was attempting to pick off the weak first, but Yoda was ready for him. With lightning-fast reflexes, Yoda jumped between Kit Fisto and Palpatine, engaging the Sith Lord in combat. Anakin, on the other hand, hung back in the background. He was not mentally prepared for the situation and was filled with conflicting emotions. He had not expected the ferocity of Palpatine's attack and was still struggling to make sense of what was happening. He felt pulled in different directions, unsure of what to do. As the battle raged on, Anakin watched from the sidelines, his thoughts a jumbled mess. He knew he needed the help, but his fear and confusion held him back. He felt like he was losing control, and he didn't know how to regain it. He watched as Yoda and Palpatine fought, their lightsabers clashing in a whirlwind of light and sound. In that moment, Anakin realized that he had a choice to make. He could continue to hold back, allowing fear to control him, or he could step forward and do what needed to be done, steeling himself for the battle to come, and step forward to join the fight. As the battle continued, Kit Fisto was disarmed and flung out the window of the tall building, sending him to his death. Meanwhile, Anakin and Yoda continued to fight Palpatine with all their might. They were determined to put an end to the Sith Lord's reign of terror once and for all. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Anakin and Yoda were able to defeat Palpatine. The Sith Lord laid on the ground, his body writhing in pain. As he looked up to Anakin, he said, "I told you it would come to this. The Jedi are taking over." Yoda could sense Anakin's confliction, and he intervened, saying, "Our judgment, clouded by the dark side, no longer, Skywalker. Your fate, by you, must be chosen." Palpatine looked at Anakin, his eyes filled with cunning. "If I fall, so does the knowledge to save Padme." Suddenly, it clicked in Yoda's head. Palpatine has been able to control Anakin all along because of a secret love. Yoda spoke, his voice filled with wisdom. "Wrong we were. Love, compassion, qualities of a Jedi." Anakin was filled with a newfound clarity as he realized the truth of Yoda's words. He knew what he had to do, and he prepared himself for the task ahead. With the help of Yoda, he was finally able to reclaim control of his fate. As Palpatine saw that his manipulation had failed on Anakin, he let out a wicked laugh. "So be it, Jedi." He spat, unleashing a wave of force lightning so strong that only Yoda could put up a defense. The wave sent Anakin flying backwards, leaving him unconscious. Yoda and Palpatine were now in the midst of another intense battle, one-on-one. Their lightsabers clashed in a symphony of sparks, each strike echoing through the room. Palpatine was a master of the dark side, but Yoda was a seasoned warrior, and he was not about to let the Sith Lord win. The two clashed, their lightsabers moving at lightning speed as they sought to gain the upper hand. They moved with fluid grace, their bodies twisting and turning as they blocked and parried each other's strikes. Yoda was fast and nimble, his years of experience serving him well as he fought the Sith Lord. As the fight continued, Anakin began to stir. His eyes opened, seeing only a blur of green and red as the two combatants clashed. Suddenly, there was only red, with the Chancellor standing above him. Anakin tried to get up, but he was too weak. He could feel the dark side pulsing through the room. Palpatine would order the clones to come into the room to apprehend Anakin as he prepared to deliver his final strike to the Jedi. Chancellor Palpatine stood before the Galactic Senate, his piercing yellow eyes scanning the room as he called for an emergency meeting. The senators were murmuring amongst themselves, wondering why the Chancellor had summoned them at such short notice. As they quieted down, Palpatine began to speak. "Senators, I have called you here today to inform you of a grave matter. An attempt on my life was made, and the perpetrator of this act can only be none other than the Jedi Order." Gasps of shock echoed through the Senate chambers as the senators sat stunned. Many of them had never considered the possibility of the Jedi turning against the Emperor. For too long, the Republic has relied on the Jedi Order, giving them far too much power and independence. They act as they please, without the regard of law or wishes of the Senate. Their actions have destabilized the Republic and put us all at risk. Palpatine's voice was calm, yet menacing, and the senators could feel the power and authority behind his words. "But I have a solution. To save the Republic and bring stability once more, the Jedi Order must cease to exist. They must answer to the Senate and be held accountable for their actions. I propose the creation of the First Galactic Empire, with me as its leader. Together, we can restore order to the galaxy and protect the Republic from those who would seek to destroy it." The senators were silent, considering the Emperor's proposal. Some of them nodded in agreement, while others remained skeptical. But as Palpatine continued to speak, his words swayed the crowd, and they began to see the wisdom in his plan. "The Jedi have failed us. They have become a threat to the stability of the Republic, and if we do not act now, we will all suffer the consequences. The time has come to put aside our differences and work together for the good of the galaxy." And with that, Palpatine declared the creation of the First Galactic Empire. With the Senate's approval, the Jedi Order was forever changed. The once proud guardians of peace and justice were now seen as a threat to the stability of the galaxy, and their power was forever diminished. The Republic had fallen, and the Empire had risen to take its place. As the Senate meeting concluded, Palpatine's mind was already turning to his next move. He knew that he had to act fast if he was to succeed in eliminating the Jedi. The Jedi were still unaware of what was happening, as the only ones who truly knew of Palpatine's true nature were now dead or imprisoned. With a sly smile, Palpatine ordered the activation of Order 66, the secret contingency plan that would cause the clones across the galaxy to turn against their Jedi generals. The clones, programmed to follow the commands of the Supreme Chancellor without question, carried out the order without hesitation. Palpatine himself led the charge on the Jedi Temple, accompanied by a legion of clone troopers. The Jedi were caught off guard, caught between the barrage of blaster fire and the relentless advance of the clones. But Palpatine was relentless, his powers growing stronger with each passing moment, as he effortlessly killed any Jedi that stood in his path. As the smoke cleared, the last of the Jedi lay dead. Palpatine stood amidst of the rubble of the once great temple. A wave of satisfaction washed over him as he gazed upon his handiwork. The Jedi Order was no more, and the Republic, now the Empire, was his to rule. "The galaxy is mine," Palpatine whispered, a sinister smile spreading across his face. "And now, with the Jedi gone, there is no one who can stand in my way." Anakin Skywalker was trapped in a nightmare that was tearing him apart, sweat pouring down his face as he relived the horrors of his vision. In his mind's eye, he watched as Padme Amidala screamed out for him, her voice echoing in his ears even after he woke up. With a jolt, Anakin found himself back in reality. He was confined to a small, eerie cell, his movements restricted by restraints that bounded him. The cell was cold and quiet, save for the sound of his own ragged breathing. He tried to move, to use the Force to escape, but the restraints seemed to sap him of his strength, making it nearly impossible for him to channel his power. Anakin was left alone within his thoughts, his mind racing with questions. Was Padme okay? Had Yoda survived? And why was he still alive when so many others had fallen? Anakin screamed in anger, trying to break free from his bounds, but his efforts were in vain, and he was left feeling powerless and trapped. Just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, he sensed the dark presence of Emperor Palpatine approaching. The ray shields of his cell flickered off, and Palpatine stepped inside. his cold, emotionless eyes fixed on Anakin. It was quiet for a moment as the two of them simply stared at each other until Palpatine spoke. "It truly is a pity, Anakin," he said, his voice smooth and even. "How much grander and more powerful you could have become." Anakin squirmed in his restraints, his anger radiating off him like a whirlwind. Palpatine's smile was cruel as he continued, "Your anger is like a wildfire, Anakin. Focus it, channel it, and no one will be able to stop you." The Emperor's eyes glinted as he leaned in closer. "The survival of your beloved wife depends on it," he whispered. Anakin's eyes shifted, the irises turning a menacing shade of yellow as the dark side took a hold. Palpatine stepped back, his smile widened as he turned to leave the cell. Anakin was left alone, consumed by his anger and his thirst for power. Padme, Obi-Wan, Mace Windu, Ahsoka, and Bail Organa gathered in a secluded and dimly lit room, surrounded by shadows that seemed to whisper secrets of their own. They sat around a table, each lost in their own thoughts as they tried to come to terms with the recent events that had transpired. The air was thick with tension and uncertainty as they discussed the future of the Jedi Order and the fate of Anakin Skywalker. Obi-Wan and Mace Windu had been searching for any surviving Jedi and reaching out to them, but their efforts had been unsuccessful. The assumption among the group was that Anakin had fallen, but Padme refused to believe such a thing. As she sat at the table, her hand rested on her stomach as she looked down, blinking back tears, her emotions betraying her. Obi-Wan, being perceptive, asked Padme if the father of her child was Anakin. Padme didn't respond with words, but the look of sadness in her eyes confirmed it. Padme suddenly clutched her stomach and winced in pain. It was clear that she was going into labor, and Ahsoka sprang into action, helping her deliver her twins, Luke and Leia. As Padme rested, the others continued the discussion about their next steps. They knew that marching into Coruscant to challenge Palpatine was not an option, and that it would be difficult to lure him out. They decided that it was best to go into hiding for the time being, and that Bail would work to form a rebellion against the Empire. Just as they were finalizing their plan, Bail's guards rushed into the room shouting that the Empire was there and that a Venator had just entered orbit. Mace's eyes narrowed as he suspected that they must have been tracking Padme. As the group prepared to make their escape, the sounds of blaster fire and shouting could be heard from outside the door. Bail's guards quickly alerted that the Empire was upon them and that they needed to act fast. Mace and Obi-Wan quickly assessed the situation and determined they needed to split up in order to reduce the risk of being captured. Bail suggested that he and Padme go their own way. As senators of the Empire, they would be untouched, but Padme refused to be separated from her children and insisted on going with the Jedi. With Padme holding Leia and Ahsoka holding Luke, they all set out in separate directions. The sounds of clone troopers and the soon-to-be Grand Inquisitor was in hot pursuit. The group was soon forced to split up further, with Mace and Obi-Wan going one way and Padme and Ahsoka going another. The chase was intense, with blaster fire flying past them and the sound of footsteps getting closer and closer. Padme, still recovering from birth, was struggling to keep up, but Ahsoka was determined to protect her and the children. As they made their way through the winding halls of the building, Padme suddenly tripped and fell, dropping Leia in the process. The Grand Inquisitor was hot on their heels, and Ahsoka knew they couldn't afford to wait. She quickly scooped up Luke and urged Padme to keep moving. In that moment, a critical decision was made. Padme could either continue on with Ahsoka and the children, or stay behind and try to slow down the pursuit. Padme, not wanting to put her children in any more danger, made the selfless choice to stay behind and fight. Ahsoka, heartbroken, but knowing it was the right thing to do, took off with the children, leaving Padme to face the Grand Inquisitor and his army alone. Ahsoka would clutch the crying children in her arms as she soared through the sky in her ship. Her heart ached as she looked into their wide, tear-filled eyes. She promised to bring both of their parents home to them, even though she knew it would be a dangerous mission. The children, Luke and Leia, were the only remaining links to their mother Padme and their father Anakin. When Ahsoka finally met up with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Mace Windu, they discussed the next steps they would take to keep the children safe. After much discussion, they decided to split the children up, with Luke going with Obi-Wan to Tatooine and Leia going with Mace Windu to Yavin 4. Ahsoka, however, refused to go into hiding. She had a personal mission to find her former master Anakin Skywalker and her friend Padme. She was determined to bring them both back to their children. With a heavy heart, she said goodbye to Luke and Leia and set off on her mission. As Padme was escorted to the Emperor's throne room on Coruscant, she was filled with dread at the thought of what laid ahead. She tried to steel herself for the meeting, but it was no use. The Emperor was waiting for her when she arrived, and his polite demeanor only added to her unease. "Senator Amidala," he said, bowing his head in greeting. "I'm glad we finally have a chance to talk." Padme was wary, but she held her ground. "I'm not sure what you hope to achieve with this conversation," she said, her voice steady. "I won't betray the people I represent." The Emperor smiled, but his eyes were cold. "I understand your concern, Senator. But as the leader of the Empire, my priority is to keep you safe, as well as the entire galaxy. Your democracy has chosen this course of action, and I don't plan on letting them down." Padme would insist. "If that were the case, you would let democracy resume," she said, her voice rising. The Emperor's smile faded, replaced by a look of annoyance. "I am afraid that's not possible, Senator. Now, let me help you and your family. They'll be much safer under our protection." Padme was about to retort when the doors to the throne room opened and Anakin Skywalker was brought in, still restrained. The sight of her husband filled Padme with a mix of joy and fear. She tried to run to him, but the Emperor's guard shoved her to the ground. Anakin was screaming, trying to break free, but he couldn't. His eyes were filled with tears, and Padme could see the pain etched on his face. The Emperor walked over to him, a cruel smile on his face. "Maybe a chat with Anakin will sway you, Senator," he said, his voice dripping with malice. He gestured to the guards to move, and then blasted Anakin with lightning from his fingertips. The sound of his screams filled the room as smoke rose from his body. Padme was on her feet now, pleading with the Emperor to stop, but he continued relentlessly. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Emperor stopped, and Anakin was unconscious, his head hanging down. The Emperor turned to Padme, his smile returning. "So, do we have an agreement, Senator? Join me, and your family can live on Coruscant peacefully." Padme was filled with tears, and she didn't say a word. The Emperor's smile faded, replaced by a look of annoyance once more. Palpatine then prepared to strike Anakin again with lightning, but Padme reluctantly agreed to his terms, just to protect her husband. "So, do we have an agreement, Senator?" Palpatine spoke, with a smile appearing on his face. Padme reluctantly agreed, under the condition that her family would remain safe. Palpatine had a smile on his face as he said, "Of course, my dear." Palpatine had been on a mission to create the perfect apprentice. He has spent countless years collecting DNA samples from various Jedi, hoping to use their genetic material to create a powerful Sith warrior. But despite his efforts, all his attempts had failed, as the dark side required a special kind of vessel that could withstand its immense power. Palpatine's experiments were all but abandoned until he got his hands on the chosen one himself, Anakin Skywalker. Using Anakin's DNA as the base, he began to experiment with different combinations of genetic material from other Force users, hoping to create the ultimate weapon. But as his twisted experiments continued, Palpatine's failed creations began to pile up. Some were horribly deformed and barely sentient, while others were consumed by madness and destroyed themselves in the frenzy of dark side energy. Yet, Palpatine continued on with his mad pursuit, convinced that he would eventually succeed. And then, finally, the perfect vessel emerged. Dubbed Starkiller, the creature was a terrifying image of power and strength, fueled by the dark side and controlled by Palpatine himself. He had finally created the ultimate weapon, one that could destroy the Jedi and conquer the galaxy once and for all. As the project name was revealed, a wave of terror swept through the galaxy. The mere thought of such a powerful and unstoppable force caused fear and panic to spread like a wildfire. Meanwhile, Padme had been living on Coruscant for several months now, ever since she agreed to Palpatine's demands. Every day felt like a battle as she tried to find ways to escape, gather allies, and free her beloved husband from prison. She knew it would not be easy, but Padme was determined, and with determination came hope. She called upon Sabe, her former body double, and together they devised a plan. The two women sat down in a secluded part of the city, surrounded by shadows, and discussed the details of their risky plan. Padme's voice was laced with concern when she asked, "Are you sure this will work?" Sabe's eyes glinted with determination. "I've done this before, Padme. Trust me, it will work." Her conviction was contagious, and Padme felt her own confidence rise. As they parted ways, Sabe's heart raced as she stepped out into the bustling streets of Coruscant. She had agreed to become Padme's body double for this plan, and the weight of the task was heavy on her shoulders. She knew that if anything went wrong, she would be responsible for Padme's capture, or even worse. The Imperial forces had been closely watching Padme for months now, but they had no reason to suspect that Sabe was anything more than a simple handmaiden. It was time to put their plan into action. Sabe walked through the crowded streets, feeling the weight of the Empire's eyes on her every move. She tried to stay calm and collected, just as Padme had taught her. Every step, every gesture, it had to be perfect. Meanwhile, Padme had made her way to the spaceport, keeping a low profile as she went. She had arranged for a ship to take her to a distant planet where she hoped to gather the help she needed to free her husband. As she boarded the ship, she couldn't help but worry about Sabe. Had their plan worked? Was Sabe able to distract the Imperial forces long enough for her to escape? She sat down and took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. The ship started to lift off, and Padme felt a glimmer of hope. But little did she know, Palpatine had been one step ahead of her the entire time. He wanted her to believe that her plan had worked, so she would feel free enough to meet with the people he sought to destroy. Palpatine had secretly tracked and followed her, waiting for the right moment to strike. As the ship flew through space, Padme started to relax, feeling more and more hopeful with each passing moment. She even allowed herself to doze off, her mind at ease for the first time in months. It wasn't until they landed on the remote planet that she received the news. Sabe had succeeded. The Empire had followed her every move, leaving Padme free to escape undetected, so she thought. Padme let out a sigh of relief, feeling gratitude for Sabe's bravery and sacrifice. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but with Sabe's help, she had taken the first step towards saving her husband and ending the Empire's reign of terror. Padme, Ahsoka Tano, and Bail Organa met up to discuss the latest events. The three of them sat down around a small table, Padme frowning as she began to speak. "I have some news," she said, her voice low and tense. "Anakin is being held captive on Coruscant." Bail leaned forward, his eyes wide with concern. "What? By the Empire?" Padme nodded, and Ahsoka sat silently, her fingers tapping nervously against the table. Bail shook his head. "This is terrible news. We have to do something. Rex has told me that clone troopers are beginning to defect within the Empire. They are tired of serving the Empire and want to help us in our rebellion." Ahsoka raised an eyebrow. "That's good news. Do you think we can work with them?" Bail nodded. "Rex has already placed some of these defectors as spies within the ranks of the Empire. With their help, we may be able to get more information about the Empire's plans and weaken them from within." Padme's eyes widened at the news. "That's a brilliant idea. We must get Anakin out of there and work with these defectors to build our rebellion." Ahsoka listened carefully, mulling over the information that had been shared. She devised a plan. With the help of the clone spies, she could sneak into the holding area where Anakin was being held captive. Padme would recommend that she accommodate her in this mission, but Ahsoka was strongly against this notion. She leaned into Padme, whispering, "Your children could be the last hope for the Jedi. They are safe with Obi-Wan. They will need their mother." Leaning back, she looked at Padme with uncertainty on her face. Padme would agree, and from there, they would all split up. But, unbeknownst to the trio, their conversation had been monitored by an Imperial probe droid. They had been listening in and relaying the information back to the Empire. Ahsoka would sneak her way onto the planet of Coruscant. She moved quickly and stealthily through the darkened alleyways, her sense heightened as she tried to avoid detection. She had to find the clone who had promised to help her, and she had to do it before it was too late. Finally, she spotted the clone in question, standing in the shadows, waiting for her. He nodded to her, his eyes darting nervously around the deserted street. "Come on," he whispered, motioning for her to follow him. "We have to move quickly." They moved through the city, slipping through the shadows and trying to avoid the prying eyes of the Empire. The clone led her through a series of alleyways and back streets until they finally arrived at the prison where Anakin was being held. As planned, there was a clone squadron waiting for them to pretend to arrest Ahsoka, taking her to the prison so she could release Anakin. It was all going according to plan, too perfectly, in fact. They made their way to Anakin's cell, where he was released. As they made their way out, Anakin suddenly stopped in his tracks. His eyes narrowed in suspicion. "This way is wrong," he growled. "Something's not right." Ahsoka tried to reassure him, telling him that the clones were on their side, but Anakin wasn't buying it. He summoned one of Ahsoka's lightsabers and ignited it, ready to defend himself. Just as he did, the clone squad called for backup, revealing that their plan had been blown. Palpatine had executed the clones who were supposed to help Ahsoka and replaced them with his own loyal soldiers. Anakin sprang into action, striking down the clones with incredible speed and skill. Ahsoka could barely keep up, her own lightsaber twirling in her hands as they fought their way to freedom. As they escaped, they were met with no resistance. This was unsettling to both of them, and they moved cautiously through the darkened halls, knowing that danger lurked around every corner. Finally, they came to a complete stop as they saw a figure standing in front of them. The figure reeked of the dark side, and his presence was soul-crushing. Anakin stepped forward, his lightsaber at the ready. "Who are you?" he demanded. The figure simply smiled. His eyes glittered with malevolence. "I am what you could have been," he said. Anakin and the Sith stood facing each other with a tense standoff. The air crackled with tension as they circled each other, their lightsabers glowing brightly in the darkness. Anakin could feel his heart racing as he tried to stay focused. He refused to let fear take over. He had to protect Ahsoka and make sure she made it out alive. The Sith seemed to sense his hesitation and sneered. "You are nothing, Jedi. You can't defeat me." Anakin gritted his teeth, determined to prove him wrong. He charged forward, swinging his lightsaber with all his might. The Sith parried his attack easily, his movements smooth and precise. As they continued to fight, Ahsoka suddenly appeared out of nowhere, her lightsaber in hand. She charged towards the Sith, her eyes blazing with determination. Anakin shouted for her to wait, but it was too late. The Sith quickly dodged her attack and then grabbed her with the Force, choking her. Anakin felt his blood run cold as he watched his friend struggle for breath. Ahsoka let out a whisper with her last breath. "Master, help." Anakin felt a surge of anger and fear as he watched the Sith harm his apprentice. With a quick Force push, he sent the Sith crashing through the wall, but the Sith was quick to recover, and soon they were facing each other again. Suddenly, a wave of Force lightning came out of nowhere, illuminating the room in a blinding flash of blue. Anakin could barely see as the Sith lunged towards him, his lightsaber blazing. Anakin barely had time to react, but he managed to defend the attack. The Sith flipped over Anakin's head, using the Force to rip Ahsoka's lightsaber from her hand and throwing her a great distance out of view. Anakin was alone with the Sith now. He knew he had to fight with everything he had. The two of them continued their battle, their lightsabers clashing and sparking as they fought for their lives. The sound of clashing lightsabers filled the air as Anakin and the Sith fought with fierce intensity. Their movements were fast and precise, each one trying to gain the upper hand. The room illuminated with flashes of blue and red as the lightsabers clashed against each other. The sound of the blades hissing through the air was almost deafening, drowning out all other noise. Anakin was determined to protect his friends and defeat the Sith once and for all. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he continued to fight, his mind fully focused on the battle at hand. The Sith was just as determined, his eyes blazing with a fierce intensity. He fought with almost mechanical precision, his movements calculated and precise. Anakin was starting to feel the strain of battle, his arms growing heavy from the constant strain of deflecting the Sith attacks. He could feel his muscles burning as he tried to keep up with the Sith's relentless assault. Despite the odds against him, Anakin refused to give up. He was determined to protect everything and defeat the Sith, no matter what the cost was. As they continued to fight, Anakin could see the strain on the Sith's face. He was starting to grow tired, his movements becoming more sluggish. With a sudden burst of energy, Anakin lunged himself forward, swinging his lightsaber with all his might. The Sith tried to parry the attack, but he was too slow. Anakin's lightsaber struck true, slicing the Sith's chest, sending him tumbling to the ground. For a moment, Anakin stood there, his lightsaber still ignited, looking down at the fallen Sith. The room was filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of their labored breathing. But before he could deliver the final strike, a loud noise echoed through the room. Anakin turned around, his lightsaber held at ready, to see several clone troopers rushing towards him, blasters blazing. Anakin knew he was outnumbered and outgunned. He had to gather Ahsoka and leave as quickly as possible. He sprinted over to where Ahsoka was laying, picking her up gently and slinging her over his shoulder. With a quick nod to the fallen Sith, Anakin turned and ran towards the exit, his lightsaber held at the ready. The clone troopers pursued him relentlessly, their blaster fire peppering the walls and the floors as Anakin and Ahsoka made their escape. They ran as fast as they could, dodging and weaving through the maze of corridors and rooms. At last, they burst out into the bright light of the open sky, gasping for breath. Anakin looked around, searching for a way to escape, but it was no use. The clone troopers had them surrounded. Anakin prepared himself for the battle, determined to go down fighting. But just as the clone troopers were about to open fire, a group of rebel clone troopers led by Commander Cody appeared, their blasters blazing. Anakin fought side by side with the new allies, taking out the clone troopers with fierce determination. When the smoke cleared, they stood victorious. But Cody would say, "We must leave now, before it's too late." The dark side was calling to Starkiller, urging him to embrace his anger and feed off of it. He could feel the power coursing through his veins, making him stronger and more focused than he had ever been before. The defeat at the hands of Anakin Skywalker had only fueled his desire to become more powerful and seek revenge. The Emperor was displeased with Starkiller's loss, but he saw the potential in the young apprentice. He knew with the right guidance and training, Starkiller could become a powerful weapon for the Sith, capable of bringing the galaxy to its knees. Anakin Skywalker was Starkiller's first opponent, and the fact that he had gone toe-to-toe with the legendary Jedi was more than impressive. But now, Anakin was in his way, and he knew that he had to eliminate him if he wanted to become the most powerful Sith Lord in the galaxy. Anakin was the only one who could stop him, and Starkiller knew that he had to strike quickly and decisively if he wanted to succeed. He knew that Anakin had weaknesses, and he was determined to exploit them to his advantage. The fate of the galaxy hung in balance, and the stakes had never been higher. Starkiller was willing to do whatever it took to achieve his goals, even if that meant sacrificing everything. Meanwhile, the clones, who had once been the backbone of the Empire's military might, had begun to openly rebel against their former empire. The Emperor, however, was not worried. He had a new army of conscripted soldiers ready to take up the mantle of the clone troopers. Although they were not quite as skilled as their predecessors, they outnumbered the clones and were more than capable of quelling the rebellion. As the Senate convened for an emergency meeting, the Emperor appeared before them to address the crisis. He wasted no time in painting the clones as traitors who had planned a military takeover. "Behold, the footage of the clone rebellion," the Emperor declared, gesturing to a holographic display that showed images of the violent uprising. Gasps of fear rippled through the Senate as they watched the chaos unfold before them. The Emperor waited until the murmurs died down before continuing. "Under my careful watch, a new military has arisen," he announced. "One more loyal and capable of bringing peace to the galaxy. If the clones are not dealt with immediately, they will pose a threat to the stability of the Empire." The Senate was clearly shaken by the Emperor's words, and many of the senators were hesitant to take action against the clones. However, the Emperor's argument had convinced enough of them to support his plan of using his new army to crush the rebellion. As the Emperor's plan to eliminate the clones went into effect immediately, the galaxy was plunged into a state of shock and horror. Even the clones who had not turned against the Empire were executed for their alleged treason, and the sheer number of clone troopers falling to the blasters of their former comrades was nothing short of horrific. Cody and Rex, two of the most skilled and trusted clones who had served alongside Anakin during the Clone Wars, were devastated by the events unfolding around them. They knew that they had to do something to help, and so they pleaded with Anakin to convince Senator Organa to speed up his rebellion and make it official. But despite their best efforts, Bail Organa had still not gathered enough resources and people to openly rebel against the Empire. The clones were left alone in the galaxy with no one to fight for their cause. However, Anakin and Ahsoka refused to let their former comrades die in vain. Anakin met with his wife Padme, who was with Obi-Wan and Anakin's children, to discuss how they could fight back against the Empire and save the clones. Obi-Wan and Padme were strongly against Anakin's plans, fearing that it would lead to certain death, but Anakin was resolute in his determination to help the clones. The clones used to put their lives on the line for me, for you, for all of us, he said. Now it's time for us to return the favor. Despite their reservations, Obi-Wan and Padme could not deny Anakin's conviction. They knew that they had to support him in his quest to save the clones, even if it meant putting himself in harm's way. And so, with Anakin leading the charge, a new rebellion was born. The clones who had survived the Empire's onslaught joined the forces with Anakin, Ahsoka, and their allies, fighting back against their former government and vowing to bring peace and justice to the galaxy once more. Anakin and Ahsoka knew that they could not fight the Empire alone. They needed to find any surviving Jedi and rally them to their cause. They traveled across the galaxy, reaching out to any Jedi they could find and urging them to join their rebellion. Many of the Jedi they found were disillusioned and fearful after Order 66 and the fall of the Republic. But Anakin and Ahsoka's passion and conviction inspired them, and they began to see the importance of fighting back against the Empire. Meanwhile, Cody and Rex took a similar approach with the remaining clones. They traveled all around, encouraging their former comrades to join them in their fight against the Empire. They reminded the clones that they were once soldiers fighting for the greater good, and that their duty to protect the galaxy did not end with the fall of the Republic. Slowly but surely, more and more Jedi and clones began to join their cause. They formed a small but determined group, fighting against the Empire's forces wherever they could. They knew that the odds were stacked against them, but they refused to give up. For Anakin and Ahsoka, this rebellion was not just a last stand for the clones, but for the Jedi as well. They knew that if they failed, the Jedi would cease to exist, but they were determined to do everything in their power to prevent that from happening. As they prepared for their next battle, Anakin and Ahsoka looked at the ragtag group of Jedi and clones standing beside them. They knew that their fight would be a difficult one, but they were ready to face whatever challenges laid ahead. We may be outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched, Anakin said. But we will never give up. We will fight for what is right, for what we believe in, and, in the end, we will prevail. Anakin, Ahsoka, Cody, and Rex knew that they did not have the numbers to support a long and drawn-out war. Every strike needed to be calculated and precise, with no room for error. At first, they found themselves to be successful. They were able to hit the Empire where it hurt and deal some significant blows, but their success was short-lived. The Empire grew stronger and more experienced with every passing day. They began to anticipate the rebellion's moves and counter them with brutal efficiency. Anakin and his comrades hoped that they could hold out long enough for Bail Organa's rebellion to form, but the reality was that time was not on their side. As the conflict continued, slivers of the truth began to surface about the Emperor's manipulation and control over the galaxy. More and more people began to see the Jedi and clones for what they truly were, heroes fighting for the greater good. Bail Organa continued to work tirelessly to gather support for his rebellion, convincing more and more senators that the time for action was now. The Jedi and clones continued to fight on, even as their numbers dwindled. They knew that the odds were against them, but they refused to give up. For them, this was not just a fight for their own survival, but for the survival of the galaxy as a whole. Times were getting rough. The group lacked proper resources to sustain their efforts, and Anakin began to see the writing on the wall. He was getting desperate, and desperate times call for desperate measures. He suggested an all-or-nothing plan. They would attack the heart of the Empire, Coruscant. They believed that the Empire would never suspect such a move. As the entire Jedi and clone army emerged from hyperspace above Coruscant, they were met with a stunning and overwhelming resistance. The Venator-class Star Destroyers had created a formidable blockade, with their powerful laser cannons firing relentlessly at the incoming rebel ships. The space battle was intense and chaotic, with explosions and blaster fire lighting up the sky. The rebel ships were quickly being eliminated one by one, as the Empire's superior numbers and weaponry took their toll. Anakin felt the weight of this desperate situation bearing down on him. He knew that this was their last chance, and he refused to let it slip away without a fight. Despite the overwhelming odds, he was determined to push forward, make the Empire pay for their atrocities. As the clones fought bravely, the ships began to fall one by one. The situation looked hopeless as the rebels' forces were outgunned and outnumbered. But just when all hope seemed lost, a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon. From the far reaches of the galaxy, Bail Organa's rebellion emerged, joining the fight in a stunning and unexpected move. Their arrival was a game changer, and they provided the much needed reinforcements and resources that the rebel forces needed to turn the tide of the battle. Together, the clones, Jedi, and rebels pushed forward with renewed strength and determination, their combined forces overwhelming the Empire's defenses. Despite the odds, they managed to break through the blockade and launch their assault at the heart of the Empire. The battle was far from over, but in that moment, they had taken a crucial step towards victory. As the Clone Rebellion forces descended upon Coruscant, they found themselves outnumbered and outgunned. The stormtroopers of the Empire seemed to be everywhere, their blasters raining down death from all angles. But despite this, the clones fought with ferocity that the stormtroopers could not match. They had been bred and trained for battle, and their experience showed as they expertly maneuvered through the streets and alleys, taking out stormtroopers left and right. But even with their superior training, the clones were no match for Starkiller. The Dark Apprentice moved like a whirlwind, his lightsaber flashing as he cut through the clone ranks. His power in the Force was immense, and he used it to a devastating effect, throwing clones aside like ragdolls. Despite the odds against them, the clones pressed forward, determined to complete their mission. They knew that this was their last chance to strike a decisive blow against the Empire, and they were willing to give everything they had. The fight was fierce, with blaster bolts and lightsaber strikes lighting up the sky. The sounds of explosions and screams filled the air as the two sides clashed. But as the battle raged on, it became clear that the clones were slowly gaining the upper hand. Their experience and skill proved too much for the stormtroopers, who began to fall back, and as they did, the clones pushed forward, taking ground inch by inch. But just as it seemed like victory was within their grasp, Starkiller appeared once again. This time, he was even more powerful. He seemed to be able to anticipate every move the clones made. Despite their best efforts, the clones began to fall, their numbers dwindling with each passing moment. But the rematch was about to occur as Anakin arrived on the scene. Anakin could feel the raw power emanating from Starkiller as the two squared off. The air crackled with tension as they circled each other, both waiting for the other to make a move. Starkiller's red lightsaber glowed menacingly, casting eerie shadows across his face. Anakin, his blue lightsaber at the ready, remained calm and focused, ready for whatever was to come. The two combatants clashed, their lightsabers meeting in a brilliant display of sparks and energy. Starkiller was a fierce opponent, his movements fluid and precise. Anakin was impressed, but he was not intimidated. He knew he had to use all his skill if he wanted to come out on top. As they continued the battle, it was clear that Starkiller was the more powerful of the two. His strength was incredible, and his lightsaber skills were unmatched. Anakin was on the defensive, blocking each of Starkiller's strikes with difficulty. He could feel the strain of the battle taking its toll on him, but Anakin was not one to give up easily. He called upon the Force, using it to bolster his strength and speed. He felt a renewed surge of energy as he launched a flurry of attacks against Starkiller, his lightsaber whirling through the air in a blur of blue. Starkiller responded in kind, his own lightsaber moving with blinding speed. They continued to battle fiercely, their lightsabers clashing with a deafening roar. Each blow seemed to land with thunderous impact, sending waves of energy rippling through the air. For what seemed like an eternity, the two fought, neither gaining a clear advantage. But then, Anakin saw an opening. With a swift movement, he struck at Starkiller, his lightsaber connecting with the other man's arm. Anakin took advantage of the momentary distraction, striking at Starkiller with all his might. Starkiller would stumble backwards, his lightsaber falling out of his hands. Anakin advanced, ready to deliver the final blow, but something was holding him back. He could sense the conflict within Starkiller, the turmoil and pain that the other man was feeling. He hesitated, unsure of what to do, and in that moment, Starkiller made his move. With a sudden burst of strength, he lunged at Anakin with the Force, gripping around Anakin's neck. Anakin gasped for breath, but it was no use. He felt his consciousness slipping away as Starkiller's grip tightened. Just as Anakin felt himself fading, he saw a flash of movement out of the corner of his eye. It was Ahsoka coming to his aid. With a fierce cry, she struck at Starkiller, her lightsaber connecting with his side. Starkiller let out a howl of pain, releasing his hold on Anakin. The two men stumbled backwards, gasping for breath. Ahsoka moved to stand by Anakin's side, her lightsabers at the ready. Starkiller glared at them both, his eyes filled with hatred and anger, but he knew he was beaten. With a last look of defiance, he turned and fled, disappearing into the shadows. Anakin and Ahsoka stood there for a moment, catching their breath. The deafening roar of engines filled the void of space as the mighty Imperial fleet emerged out of hyperspace. The ships appeared like gargantuan behemoths, their sleek hulls glimmering in the sunlight, ready to rain down a torrent of destruction upon the helpless rebel fleet. Bail Organa knew the end was near, as he watched the massive war machines descend upon them like vengeful gods. He looked around frantically, searching for a way out. The planet of Coruscant, once a bustling center of galactic politics, was now a war zone. The streets were littered with corpses of both clone and rebel soldiers alike. The Jedi, too, had been forced into a desperate retreat, leaving the fate of the galaxy in the hands of the few brave souls still willing to fight. Bail's thoughts turned to Anakin Skywalker, his old friend and ally. If anyone could turn the tide of this battle, it was him, but he gazed up at the Star Destroyers. He knew that Anakin's fate was sealed. The young Jedi had made his push towards the Emperor's throne room, determined to end the conflict once and for all. In the throne room, the Emperor himself watched the battle unfold with a sickening glee. He had always known that this day would come, that his mastery of the dark side would one day crush anyone who dared to oppose him. He would crush this rebellion. He would rule the galaxy with an iron fist, and nothing would stand in his way. Anakin burst into the throne room, his lightsaber humming with deadly energy. The Emperor turned to face him, a sinister smile spreading across his face. "Skywalker," he said, "I've been expecting you." Anakin felt a surge of anger as he gazed upon the twisted figure of his former friend. He knew what he had to do. He ignited his lightsaber, ready to strike down the Emperor once and for all. The two clashed in a flurry of blows, their lightsabers flashing in the dim light. The Emperor was quick, his movements fluid and deadly, but Anakin was determined, fueled by his burning desire to end this conflict and restore peace to the galaxy. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Anakin saw his chance. With a swift stroke of his lightsaber, he struck the Emperor down. The Dark Lord of the Sith fell to the ground. Anakin stood there, his chest heaving, his mind reeling with the enormity of what he had just done. He knew that the galaxy would never be the same again, that the power vacuum left in the wake of the Emperor's death would lead to a new era of chaos and uncertainty. But for now, he was content to bask in the knowledge that he had done what was necessary, that he had fulfilled his destiny as the chosen one. Well, there you guys have it. I'm gonna cut it off there, and I'm kind of speaking off the top real quick. I don't usually do this in my videos, but I kind of wanted to let you guys know what's been going on with the channel. We've been doing very well. We're about to hit 90,000 subscribers, which is just absolutely crazy to me. And these what if videos have been doing very well. You guys have been enjoying them, and I enjoy making them. But unfortunately, in the process, I've been running into conflicts with YouTube and becoming monetized. I don't want to dig into this too deep, but it's been going on for like 3 months now. I've been denied monetization on my channel. I'm not too sure on why I'm getting denied, so I'm just being very careful and selective to what kind of videos I'm putting out. So I'm slowing down the production just a bit, just because I want to be sure I'm putting out the correct content that fits their guidelines, so we could get this channel monetized and hopefully grow it and make it into something extremely incredible. This whole process has been a dream, and I really enjoy taking it with you guys. But I just wanted to throw that out there real quick. I appreciate you guys watching these videos. It truly does mean the world to me. And with that said, I am going to throw in a little bit of a bonus to this what if, kind of like a deleted scene, I suppose. I kind of wanted to end the what if here, only because you can take this on forever. The story can continue forever and ever and ever. What I likely would see happening in this particular timeline is after the Emperor's death, he either has successfully cloned a younger version of himself, considering that he has Starkiller there, which he cloned using other Jedi and Anakin's DNA, kind of splicing it together to create this ultimate clone Sith. I think if he had the capabilities of doing that, he probably is at the point of cloning himself. So either he dies to Anakin here and he just rebirths himself essentially, or he could just stay dead forever. And like I said, there's this power void created, and with Starkiller still left out there unaccounted for, he could fill that void, or maybe another criminal organization could fill that void. This is what I'm saying. We could go on forever and ever and keep on telling the story. But if you guys were interested, I do have a little bit extra to the story that follows the events right after Anakin kills the Emperor. Let's get into that. As Anakin stood in the throne room, catching his breath after the intense duel, he suddenly heard a new sound. The deafening roar of blaster fire and whirring of turbo laser turrets. Looking out the window, he saw the sky filled with the menacing silhouettes of the Imperial Star Destroyers. At that moment, he knew that he had to act quickly, but it was too late. The ships were already in range, and their deadly payloads began raining down upon the city. Buildings crumbled and exploded as the Star Destroyers unleashed wave after wave of devastating energy. The streets were turned into a raging inferno, and Anakin realized with horror that there was no escape. Panicked, he searched for a way out, but he knew that the entire planet was under attack. He knew that the people of Coruscant were doomed, and all of it was because of him. He felt a searing pain in his chest as the weight of his actions bore down upon him. He had been blinded by his own ambitions, and now he was paying the ultimate price.